The bullet tore through her shoulder the moment she reached for the cabin door. Abigail Reed collapsed into snow-stained crimson, clutching a blood-soaked map with trembling fingers. Behind her, 3 riders emerged from the blizzard men wearing badges who'd murdered her father an hour ago. She had one chance. One name circled in red ink, Mason Colton. The widowed rancher inside didn't know her, didn't know what she carried, but he was about to become her only hope for survival, or her grave. Before we begin, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very end of this story. Comment below with your city so I can see how far our tale travels. Now let's begin. The pounding woke him. Mason Colton's hand found his rifle before his eyes opened. The tin cup on the table still steamed. He'd been asleep maybe 30 seconds, head down on folded arms. 5 years of this. Work until you drop. Sleep in chairs. Wake to silence. But not tonight. Someone was at his door. Weak knocking, then nothing. Then again softer, like whoever it was kept losing strength between tries. Mason crossed the room in 4 strides and yanked the door open. The woman fell forward into his arms. Jesus, blood everywhere. Her coat frozen stiff, her face white as the snow still clinging to her hair, and her eyes brown wild, fixed on something behind her in the darkness. They're coming. Her hand clutched his shirt. Right behind me. Mason dragged her inside and kicked the door shut. The wind screamed. Snow blasted across the floor before the latch caught. He lowered her down, and that's when he saw it. The hole in her shoulder. The blood still pumping out dark and thick. Who shot you? Blackwood. She coughed and red flecked her lips. Sheriff Blackwood. He killed my father. He's coming for... Her eyes rolled back. Hey, stay with me. Mason ripped her coat open. The bullet had gone clean through, but the exit wound was bad. Real bad. He'd seen men die from less during the war. He grabbed whiskey from the shelf, clean rags. His hands moved fast, packed the wound front and back, wrap it tight. She screamed when he cinched the bandage, and that was good. Meant she was still fighting. What's your name? Abigail. She gasped it out between clenched teeth. Abigail Reed. Reed. The name hit him like cold water. Judge Reed's daughter. You know him. Read about him. Federal corruption case. Railroads bribing. Mason stopped, looked at her face. Where is he? Dead. The word came out flat, empty. Blackwood shot him 2 hours ago, in our house. Made it look like a robbery. Her good hand fumbled inside her coat, pulled out a folded paper soaked dark with blood. My father said, if anything happened, find Mason Colton. He's the only one left. Mason took the paper but didn't open it. Only one left for what? To trust. Outside, a sound cut through the storm. Horses, faint but getting closer. Abigail's face went white. They found me. Mason made a choice. Maybe the wrong one, but his body was already moving, hauling her up, half carrying her to the back room. She bit back a cry when her shoulder caught the doorframe. Under the bed. There's a cellar. I can't. You can. He pulled back the rug, opened the trap door. Get down there. Don't make a sound. Don't come out until I say. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or just desperation meeting desperation. Why are you helping me? Don't know yet. She climbed down slow and painful. Mason sealed the door, replaced everything, and got back to the main room just as fists hammered on wood. He counted to 5, picked up his rifle, opened the door. 3 men stood on his porch, snow-covered steam rising off their horses. The one in front wore a sheriff's star that caught the firelight. Evening. The man's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Name's Blackwood. We're tracking a fugitive. Dangerous woman, probably wounded. Killed her father tonight, murdered him in cold blood for his money. You seen anyone come through? Mason leaned against the doorframe. In this storm, she was on foot, desperate, might have tried your door. Nobody's knocked on my door. Blackwood's eyes went past him, scanning the cabin, lingering on the floor where snow was melting into puddles, where bloody footprints led Mason had tracked her blood across the floor. Mind if we look around? Blackwood's hand rested on his gun, casual, ready, just to be safe. I mind. Sir, I'm the law. You're the law in town. Mason's rifle came up smooth and easy barrel, centered on Blackwood's chest. Out here, this is the law. One of the deputies moved. Mason's eyes flicked to him, scarred face, dead eyes, hands sliding toward his gun, and back to Blackwood. Tell your boy to keep his hands where I can see them. Blackwood raised his hand. The deputy froze. Easy now. Blackwood's smile stretched wider. We're all reasonable men, just doing our job, keeping folks safe. He took a step back, palms visible. But you should know that woman's crazy. Killed her own father over inheritance money. She'll lie, cheat, do anything to save her skin. If you see her, don't believe a word she says. Noted. There's a reward, $1,000, dead or alive. Blackwood tipped his hat. You're Mason Colton, aren't you, former Union captain? Widower, lost your family 5 years back, cholera, wasn't it? Terrible thing. The way he said it, like a threat wrapped in sympathy. Mason's finger tightened on the trigger. You done. Almost. See the Montana Central Railroad's buying land in these parts. Paying good money. Your ranch sits right where they need track. Might want to consider selling when they make an offer. Blackwood's eyes glinted. Or things could get complicated. Get off my property. Gladly. Blackwood turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. If I find out you're lying, if you're hiding that murderer that makes you an accessory, I'll be back with a warrant and 20 men. We'll tear this place apart. He smiled again. Be a shame if anything happened to your ranch. Only thing you got left, isn't it, besides those 2 graves on the hill? Mason didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stared until Blackwood laughed and walked into the storm, his men following. The door slammed. Mason locked it and stood there, rifle raised, watching through the window until the riders vanished into white darkness. His hands were shaking, not from fear. 10 minutes. He waited 10 full minutes, watching, listening. Then he went to the back room and opened the cellar. Abigail looked up at him, her face gray with pain. Are they gone? For now? She climbed out slow. You should have turned me in. Probably. Now you're part of this. They'll kill you too. Mason unfolded the bloody paper she'd given him. It was a map. Montana territory marked with red circles, railroad routes, town names, and right in the center, circled 3 times, his ranch. What is this evidence? Abigail leaned against the wall, breathing hard. My father spent 2 years investigating the Montana Central. They've been forcing settlers off land they need for expansion, bribing officials. 53 families dead or missing in the past year alone. And my ranch, you're on the list. The words settled like stones on his gut. List of what? People to eliminate. She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. The railroad needs your land. They'll offer to buy it first. When you refuse, they'll send Blackwood. Make it look like an accident. A claim dispute. Indian attack. Whatever works. Mason stared at the map. 9 locations, 9 red circles, 9 people marked for death, including him. Your father trusted these people. He did. Most of them are dead now, killed in the past 6 months. Abigail's voice cracked. You're one of 3 left. That's why I came here. Blackwood knows about the investigation, but he doesn't know who my father trusted. If he gets this map, he'll kill everyone on it. Yes. Mason folded the map and tucked it inside his shirt. Felt the blood-stiff paper against his skin. For 5 years he'd been waiting to die, going through motions. Tending a ranch that meant nothing without Sarah and Emma's laughter filling it. Living in a cabin that felt more like a tomb. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. All right, he said. What do we do? Abigail stared at him. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. You heard Blackwood. They're coming for my land anyway. Mason moved to the fireplace, started building up the fire. Difference is now I know why I'm being killed. You could sell, take the money and leave. Where would I go? Anywhere, start over, live. I tried that already, didn't take. Mason threw another log on the flames, watched sparks fly up. This ranch is all I have left. Sarah and Emma are buried on that hill. I'm not abandoning them again. Silence. Then quietly, again. Mason didn't answer. Didn't want to talk about the day he'd ridden into town for supplies, about coming home to find them both burning with fever, about watching them die while he held their hands and begged God for a trade that never came. You need rest, he said instead. Take the bed. I'll keep watch. I can't. You're shot. You'll take the bed. She was too weak to argue. Mason got her settled, then returned to the main room and pulled a chair to the window. Sat with his rifle across his knees, staring out at the storm. Behind him, barely audible, "Thank you." He didn't respond. Didn't know what to say. Hours crawled past. The fire burned low. Mason fed it wood and watched snow pile against the glass. His mind kept circling back to that map. 9 names, 6 already dead, 3 left, him and 2 others he'd never met. Movement outside. Mason tensed rifle coming up, but it was just a wolf-gray ghost slipping through drifts. It stopped 30 yards out and looked at the cabin. Yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. Then it was gone. Mason checked his rifle, made sure every round was seated right. Then he settled back and waited for dawn. In the back room, Abigail moaned in her sleep. Fever dreams, probably. The wound was clean, but infection was still possible. He'd need to check it come morning, if they lived that long, because Blackwood was coming back. Mason had seen it in the man's eyes, that flat reptile patience. He'd come back with more men and a warrant, and he'd tear this ranch apart, board by board, until he found what he was looking for, which meant Mason had maybe 12 hours to figure out what the hell to do with a wounded woman carrying evidence that could bring down half the Montana territory. He laughed, quiet, bitter sound in the darkness. 12 hours ago, his biggest problem had been whether to fix the barn roof before winter set in hard. Now he was harboring a fugitive marked for death by a corrupt railroad and sitting in a cabin with killers circling outside. Sarah would have known what to do. She always did. Practical woman, his wife. Good with people, good with words. Could talk her way out of anything. Emma would have. Mason stopped himself. Couldn't go there. Not now. He touched the map through his shirt, felt the stiff paper, the dried blood. 3 people left alive. One of them was him, and the other 2, whoever they were, had no idea death was coming for them. Outside, the wind howled, the fire crackled, and Mason Colton sat in the darkness with a rifle and a stranger's secrets, feeling more awake than he had in 5 years. Even knowing that come sunrise, everything would go straight to hell. A wolf howled somewhere in the mountains. Mason checked his ammunition one more time and waited for first light. Dawn came gray and cold. Mason hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every sound outside made his hand tighten on the rifle, wind against wood, snow sliding off the roof branches, cracking under ice. But no horses, no men, not yet. He stood and moved to the back room. Abigail was awake, staring at the ceiling, her face slick with sweat. "How's the shoulder?" "Hurts like hell." She tried to sit up and gasped. "But I'll live." "Let me check it." He unwrapped the bandage. The wound looked clean, no smell of rot, no dark lines spreading from it. Good, but her skin was hot to the touch. Fever starting. "You need willow bark tea. And rest." "I need to get out of here before Blackwood comes back." Abigail pushed his hand away and swung her legs off the bed. Stood, swayed, caught herself on the wall. "I can ride, just need a horse. You'd be dead in an hour. Better than getting you killed." Mason grabbed her good arm, steadied her. "Sit down before you fall down." "I won't let you. You don't get a vote." He guided her back to the bed, not gentle. "Blackwood's already marked me. That map you brought, I'm on it. So whether you stay or go, I'm a dead man either way. Difference is, if you stay, maybe we figure out how to stay alive." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slow. "All right, what's your plan?" "Don't have one yet." Mason moved to the window and scanned the tree line, nothing moving. But I know we can't stay here. This cabin's a trap. One way and one way out. When Blackwood comes back with his men, they'll surround us and wait. We'd starve before they got bored. So we run. Can't outrun horses, not with you wounded. He turned back to her. We need help. Someone we can trust. You said there were 3 people left on that map. Who are the other 2? Abigail closed her eyes, thinking. Thomas Garrett runs the general store in Silver Creek, about 15 miles west. Former Pinkerton agent. My father trusted him completely. And the other, Margaret Chen, owns a boarding house in Helena. She's Chinese, came over during the railroad construction, lost her husband when the Montana Central collapsed a tunnel and blamed it on worker error. She's been feeding my father information for months. Mason considered. Silver Creek was closer, but it meant traveling through open country in daylight. Helena was farther, but they could travel at night, use the storm for cover. We go to Silver Creek first, he said. Warn this Garrett, then push on to Helena together. Safety in numbers. Blackwood will be watching the roads. Then we don't take roads. Mason grabbed his heavy coat from the peg. There's an old trapper's trail through the mountains. Runs parallel to the main road but higher up, harder to see. Haven't used it in years, but it's still passable. Probably. You got a better idea. She didn't. Mason started gathering supplies, food, ammunition, blankets, medical supplies, everything they could carry on 2 horses. He worked fast hands, moving with purpose, mind racing ahead. They'd need to leave before noon, travel hard, reach Silver Creek by nightfall, assuming the weather held. Assuming Blackwood didn't find them first. Assuming a lot of things that could go wrong. Mason, he looked up. Abigail was standing again, steadier this time, holding something in her good hand. A small leather journal, water-stained and worn. This was my father's. He kept notes on everyone involved in the investigation. Names, dates, payments. If something happens to me, if Blackwood catches us, you need to get this to the territorial marshal in Fort Benton, Samuel Hayes. He's honest, one of the few left. Mason took the journal, flipped through pages covered in tight, careful handwriting. Numbers, locations, names he recognized, territorial senators, railroad executives, judges. Your father documented everything. He was thorough. Abigail's voice went soft. He believed in the law, believed if he gathered enough evidence the system would work, that justice would... She stopped, swallowed hard. He was wrong. Maybe, or maybe he just ran out of time. What's the difference? Mason didn't have an answer for that. He tucked the journal inside his coat next to the map. Then he went to saddle the horses. Outside, the storm had passed. The sky was low and gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. Mason moved fast, checking cinches, loading saddlebags. The horses stamped and snorted, uneasy. They could feel it too, something wrong in the air, danger close. He was tying down the last pack when he heard it, a sound that turned his blood to ice. Dogs barking, faint but getting closer. Blackwood had brought hounds. Mason ran back inside. We're leaving, now! Abigail was already up, struggling into her coat one-handed. I heard. He grabbed her good arm and pulled her toward the door. No time for gentleness. The dogs were getting louder, and beneath their barking, Mason could hear something else, hoofbeats. Lots of them. They got outside just as riders appeared at the tree line. 6 men, maybe 7. Blackwood in front on a big roan, 2 hounds, straining at leashes. Colton, Blackwood's voice carried across the snow. We need to talk. Mason shoved Abigail toward the horses. Get mounted, go north toward the ridge. Don't stop, don't look back. What about you? I'll catch up. Like hell you will. Go! He slapped her horse's rump, sent it bolting forward. Abigail grabbed the saddle horn with her good hand, barely staying on, as the animal plunged into deep snow. Mason swung onto his own horse and wheeled it around, putting himself between Abigail and Blackwood's men. His rifle came up. That's far enough. Blackwood reined in, but his men spread out, flanking, surrounding. The hounds bayed and lunged against their leads. Colton, don't be stupid. Blackwood raised his hands, showing empty palms. Nobody needs to die here. Just hand over the woman and we'll call it square. She says you murdered her father. She's a liar and a thief. Killed Judge Reed for his money, then stole evidence from an ongoing investigation. Blackwood's smile was all wrong. You're a good man, Colton. War hero, respected. Don't throw your life away protecting a murderer. Then show me the warrant. What? You said you'd come back with a warrant. Mason kept his rifle steady. Let's see it. Blackwood's smile vanished. I don't need a warrant to pursue a fleeing felon. You need one to search my property, which means you're trespassing. Mason's voice went cold. And out here I got every right to shoot trespassers. One of the deputies moved his hand toward his gun. Mason's rifle swung to cover him. Don't. The deputy froze. Blackwood laughed, sharp, humorless sound. You're making a mistake, Colton, a big one. See, I know what that woman gave you. A map. Names of people who think they can bring down the Montana Central. He leaned forward in his saddle. You really think you can win this? The railroad owns half the territory. Judges, senators, marshals. Hell, they practically own the governor. What do you have? A wounded woman and a death wish. I've got this rifle and 6 rounds in it. And I've got 7 men. You might get me, might get 1 or 2 others, but they'll kill you, and then they'll hunt down that woman and put a bullet in her head. Blackwood's eyes glinted. Is that what you want? To die for nothing. Mason's finger rested on the trigger. One squeeze, and Blackwood would drop. But then what the other men would open fire. He'd be dead before he hit the ground. And Abigail, wounded alone, running through the mountains, wouldn't last the night. But if he surrendered, they'd both die anyway. Slowly, after Blackwood got what he wanted. I'll make you a deal, Blackwood said. Give me the map and the woman. In return, I'll let you live. You can keep your ranch. Sell it to the railroad, make good money, start fresh somewhere else, clean slate. Your word on that. My word as a lawman. Mason almost laughed. I'd sooner trust a rattlesnake. Then you're a fool. Blackwood's hand dropped to his gun. Last chance, Colton. Give her up, or we take her by force. Your choice. Time slowed. Mason could see it all playing out, the draw, the shots, the blood staining fresh snow. He could see Sarah's face, Emma's smile, could hear them calling him home. Maybe it was time, but then something moved at the tree line. A flash of brown and white there and gone. The horses' nickered ears pricking forward. The hounds went crazy. They lunged against their leashes, baying and snarling. The man holding them cursed, fought to keep control. One leash snapped. The hound bolted toward the trees, howling. What the hell? Blackwood's horse reared. That's when Mason saw them. Wolves. 5, 6, maybe more. Gray ghosts melting through the trees, circling. Not attacking. Just watching with yellow eyes that caught the weak morning light. The horses panicked. 3 of Blackwood's men fought to keep their mounts under control. One lost his seat, entirely hit the ground, hard. Mason didn't wait. He spurred his horse and plunged into the trees, following the trail Abigail had broken through the snow. Behind him, shots cracked out. Bullets whined past his head, thunked into tree trunks. But he was already gone, swallowed by forest and shadow. He found Abigail a quarter mile up the slope, her horse standing with its head down, sides heaving. She'd stopped to wait for him. I told you to keep going. And I don't take orders well. She looked past him. Are they following? Not yet, but they will be. They pushed higher, the horses struggling through drifts that came up to their chests. Mason's mind raced. The wolves had bought them time, 5 minutes, maybe 10, but Blackwood would regroup. The hounds would pick up their trail. They needed distance, needed to disappear. The trapper's trail was another mile up. If they could reach it before Blackwood's men got organized, they might have a chance. They rode hard. Mason led breaking trail. Abigail followed, bent over her saddle, good hand gripping the horn. She didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, just kept moving. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the land leveled out. Mason recognized this ridge. He'd hunted elk here years ago, before Sarah died. The trapper's trail should be just ahead, marked by 3 lightning-struck pines. There, he saw them, skeletal trunks, blackened and bare. This way. The trail was narrower than he remembered, snow-choked, dangerous. One wrong step and a horse could go lame. But it hugged the mountainside, hidden from below by rock and trees. If they moved carefully, stayed quiet, Blackwood might ride right past them. They traveled for an hour, then 2. The trail climbed higher, winding through forests so thick the daylight barely penetrated. Mason kept checking behind them, listening for pursuit. But all he heard was wind in the pines and the creak of saddle leather. Finally, when the horses were stumbling with exhaustion, he called a halt. "We'll rest here, 10 minutes. They dismounted. Abigail leaned against a tree, breathing hard. Her face had gone gray again, and when Mason checked her bandage, he found it soaked through with blood. "The riding opened it up," he said. "We need to stop the bleeding. We need to keep moving. You'll bleed out if we don't." "Then I bleed out." She met his eyes. "But I won't let Blackwood catch us because I slowed us down." Stubborn woman. Mason rewrapped the shoulder tight using strips torn from his own shirt. His hands worked fast, efficient. He'd done this before in the war, patched up men with worse wounds who somehow kept fighting. "Why'd your father pick me?" he asked while he worked. "For that map. We never met. Hell, I didn't even know he existed until last night." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "He read about you, the war, the medals. He said you were the kind of man who'd do what's right, even when it cost everything." She looked at him. Was he wrong? Mason tied off the bandage. Didn't answer. They mounted again and kept moving. The trail descended now, dropping toward Silver Creek Valley. Through gaps in the trees, Mason could see smoke rising from chimneys. The town was close, maybe 3 miles. That's when they heard the gunshot, single crack echoing across the valley, then another, then a whole volley, distant but clear. Abigail's face went white. Silver Creek. They spurred their horses down the mountain, caution forgotten. The trail twisted and turned, then suddenly opened onto a cleared slope above the town. Silver Creek lay below them, and it was burning. 3 buildings were on fire, the general store, the church, the sheriff's office. People ran through streets hauling water buckets, and everywhere men on horses. Blackwood's men firing shots in the air, driving townsfolk into their homes. "No." Abigail's voice broke. "No, no, no." Mason pulled out his spyglass and focused on the general store, or what was left of it. The roof had collapsed. Flames poured from every window, and in the street in front 2 bodies lay in the snow. "Thomas Garrett," Abigail whispered. Mason adjusted the glass, focused on the bodies. One was a man in a storekeeper's apron. The other was a boy, maybe 12, both shot in the back. "I think so." Abigail made a sound like she'd been punched. "They killed him. They killed him because of me, because my father trusted him." "You didn't pull the trigger." "I might as well have." She looked at him with eyes full of rage and grief. "Margaret, in Helena. We have to warn her before we will. When it's 40 miles to Helena, by the time we get there, she'll be dead too." Abigail's hands shook. "Everyone my father trusted, everyone who tried to help, they're all dying because I couldn't, because I didn't." "Stop." Mason grabbed her arm, not rough but firm. "Blackwood did this, not you. He's the one burning towns and killing innocents. You want to honor these people, then stay alive. Get that evidence to someone who can use it. That's how you make their deaths mean something." She stared at him, then nodded slow. They turned away from Silver Creek and rode north toward Helena, toward the last person on the map, the last hope they had left. The sky grew darker, more snow coming. Mason pushed the pace, but not so hard the horses would founder. They needed these animals. Without them, they were dead. Hours passed. The landscape changed, fewer trees, more open ground. Dangerous country, nowhere to hide if Blackwood's men spotted them. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the snow orange and red, Abigail spoke. Tell me about them. Who? Your wife and daughter, Sarah and Emma. Mason's hands tightened on the reins. Why? Because Blackwood used them against you, back at the ranch. He mentioned them like a threat. She looked at him. And because if we're going to die together, I'd like to know who you were before all this. Mason didn't want to talk about it. Hadn't talked about it in 5 years. But something in Abigail's voice, that raw honesty, that refusal to look away from pain, made the words come. Sarah was a school teacher, smart as hell, could argue me into circles. He heard himself almost smile. We met in Kansas before the war. She followed me west after, even though her family said she was crazy, said the frontier would kill her. They were right. Yeah. The word came out bitter. Cholera outbreak. I was in town buying supplies. Came home to find them both sick. Fever convulsions. By the time I got the doctor out, it was too late. Emma died first. She was 6. Sarah held on another day, then he stopped, swallowed. Then she was gone too. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 5 years ago. Grief doesn't have an expiration date. Mason looked at her. Your father. Shot 3 times, once in the chest, twice in the head. Abigail's voice went flat. Blackwood made me watch. Said if I told him where the evidence was, he'd let me go. I believed him for about 2 seconds. Then I saw his eyes, and I knew. He was going to kill me no matter what I said. She paused. So I ran, grabbed the map and ran while my father bled out on our kitchen floor. I didn't even close his eyes. They rode in silence after that. What was there to say? They were both carrying ghosts, both running from deaths they couldn't prevent, both trying to make meaning out of loss that had no meaning. Darkness fell. They kept moving, guided by starlight and instinct. Mason knew. This country knew the landmarks even in shadow. The horses stumbled with exhaustion, but they pressed on. Finally, near midnight, they spotted lights ahead. Helena. Bigger than Silver Creek, sprawling across a valley between mountains. Mines operated around the clock here. Mason could see the glow of forges, hear the distant sound of hammers on rock. Margaret's boarding house is on the east side, Abigail said, near the Chinese quarter. They circled wide, avoiding the main roads, came into town from the north through alleys and back streets. Helena at night was loud saloons, spilling music, and drunks' brothels lit red miners, stumbling between shifts. Nobody paid attention to 2 riders keeping to shadows. The boarding house was a 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign, Chen's Rooms. Light glowed in the downstairs windows. Mason dismounted and helped Abigail down. She swayed and he caught her. Her skin was burning hot now, fever taking hold. I'm all right. You're not. But we're out of time. They tied the horses and approached the front door. Mason knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened a crack. A woman's face appeared, Chinese, maybe 50 eyes, sharp and suspicious. We're closed. Margaret Chen. Abigail stepped forward. My name is Abigail Reed. Judge Walter Reed was my father. He sent me to... The door flew open. Margaret grabbed Abigail's good arm and yanked her inside. Get in, both of you, now. They stumbled into a narrow hallway. Margaret slammed the door through 3 locks, then turned to face them. Your father's dead. I know. Blackwood killed him, and Thomas Garrett, and probably 5 others by now. Margaret's voice was hard. You brought death to my door, girl. I should throw you back in the street. Then do it. Abigail straightened despite the pain. But first, tell me, are you going to help us stop these bastards, or are you going to hide and hope they forget about you? Margaret stared at her. Then slowly she smiled. Your father said you had fire. She looked at Mason. Who's this? Mason Colton. The rancher, last one on the list. Margaret nodded. Good, you're both alive. That's something. She gestured toward a back room. Come, we need to talk. And you," she pointed at Abigail, "need a doctor. You look like death." "I'll live." "Maybe, but not if that shoulder festers." Margaret led them through a kitchen that smelled of ginger and smoke into a private room lined with papers and maps. A war room. "Sit, I'll make tea, then you'll tell me everything." Mason lowered Abigail into a chair. She was shaking now, fever and exhaustion catching up. He wanted to tell her to rest, but he knew she wouldn't, not until this was finished. Margaret returned with tea and clean bandages. She examined Abigail's wound with practiced hands, then began cleaning it properly. Abigail bit back screams. "Bullet went clean through," Margaret said. "That's good. No lead left inside. But infection's starting. You need real medicine, antibiotics. Can you get them?" "Maybe. I know a doctor who owes me favors." Margaret finished bandaging and sat back. "Now talk. What happened?" They told her everything. The murder, the chase, Silver Creek burning, Blackwood's men hunting them across the territory, the map and the journal and the evidence that could bring down the Montana Central Railroad. When they finished, Margaret was quiet for a long time. "Your father was a good man," she finally said. "He believed in justice, believed the system could work if good people fought hard enough." She looked at them both. "I'm not sure I believe that anymore, but I'm willing to try. For him, for my husband who died in that tunnel, for everyone the railroad crushed under its wheels." "What do we do?" Abigail asked. "We fight." Margaret pulled out her own map covered in notations. "But smart. Blackwood has men and money and the law on his side. We have truth. It's not much, but it's something." She pointed to locations on the map. "There are others, not on your father's list, but people who've suffered because of the railroad. Miners, settlers, saloon owners. If we can unite them, if we can show them the evidence, maybe we can turn this into a real fight." "Or get them all killed," Mason said. "Maybe." Margaret met his eyes. "But they're dead anyway if we do nothing. The railroad's taking everything. Land, lives, hope. At some point people have to stand up, even if it costs them everything." Mason thought about his ranch, the graves on the hill. 5 years of existing instead of living. "All right," he said. "What's the plan?" Margaret smiled, fierce, dangerous expression. "We expose them, not just Blackwood, everyone. The senators, the judges, the executives. We take your father's evidence and we make it public. Force the territorial government to act." "How?" Abigail's voice was weak but determined. "Every newspaper in Montana is bought and paid for." "Not every newspaper." Margaret pulled out a telegram. "There's a reporter, works for the Denver Post, been trying to investigate the Montana Central for months, but can't get sources. If we give him the evidence, if he publishes it in a paper outside the territory, the story spreads, becomes national, and then the railroad can't bury it." "They'll kill him," Mason said. "Probably, but journalists are stubborn, and this one's lost family to the railroad too." Margaret looked at them both. "It's a risk. Everything's a risk now, but it's our best chance." Abigail nodded. "When tomorrow, I'll send word tonight. He can be here in 3 days." Margaret stood. "Until then, you both stay hidden. This building has a cellar left over from mining days. Goes deep. If Blackwood comes, you hide there, understand?" They understood. Margaret showed them to rooms upstairs. Small, clean, warm. Mason helped Abigail to her bed, then stood there awkwardly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. You could have turned me in." "Should have." "Probably. Why didn't you?" Mason thought about that. About the moment he'd opened his door and found her bleeding in the snow. About the choice he'd made without thinking. "Guess I was tired of waiting to die," he said finally. "You gave me a reason to fight instead." She smiled, small, exhausted. "Some reason, getting shot at and hunted across the territory. Better than 5 years of silence." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Mason, your wife and daughter, they'd be proud of what you're doing, of who you are." He didn't trust himself to answer, just nodded and left, closing the door soft behind him. In his own room, Mason lay on a real bed for the first time in days and stared at the ceiling. His body screamed for sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop. 3 days until the reporter arrived. 3 days to stay hidden. 3 days before everything either worked or fell apart completely. Outside, Helena lived and breathed drunk songs, hammer strikes, the eternal sound of men digging for gold. And somewhere out there, Blackwood was hunting. Mason closed his eyes and tried to rest, knowing tomorrow would bring new dangers, new choices, new ways to die. But for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't afraid. He was ready. The boy found them on the second day. Mason was checking the horses in the stable behind Margaret's boarding house when he heard footsteps, light, quick, trying to be quiet. His hand went to his gun. "Don't shoot, mister." A kid stepped into the light, maybe 12, 13 years old, skinny with dark hair and eyes too old for his face, the kind of eyes that had seen things no child should see. "Who are you?" Tommy Briggs." The boy held up his hands. "Mrs. Chen sent me, said to tell you the reporter's coming early, tonight instead of 3 days from now." Mason's gut tightened. "Why?" "Because Blackwood knows he's coming. Got word somehow. The reporter, Mr. Fletcher, he sent a telegram saying if he doesn't come now, he won't come at all." Tommy shifted his weight, nervous. "Mrs. Chen says you need to be ready to move fast." "Where is she?" "Inside with the lady, the one who got shot." Tommy looked at Mason with those two old eyes. "Is it true what they're saying? That Sheriff Blackwood killed Judge Reed?" "Who's saying that?" "Everybody. People are scared. Blackwood's got men on every corner checking papers, searching houses. Says he's looking for murderers, but—" Tommy trailed off. "My pa says Blackwood's the real murderer. Says the judge was a good man trying to stop bad people. Your pa's right. He also says good men die first in this territory." The boy's voice went quiet. "And that speaking up just gets you killed faster." Mason studied the kid, saw himself at that age before the war, before Sarah, back when the world still made sense. "Your pa teach you that?" "Didn't have to. I seen it myself." Tommy looked away. "My uncle worked for the railroad. Complained about safety, about how they were cutting corners. They found him in a collapsed tunnel 3 months later, called it an accident." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Just make them pay, if you can." Tommy pulled an envelope from his coat. "Mrs. Chen said to give you this. Instructions for tonight." Mason took it. "You're brave coming here. If Blackwood's men catch you—" "They won't. I know every alley in this town. Been running errands for Mrs. Chen since I was 8. She helps people, gives them food when they're hungry, hides them when they're in trouble." Tommy started backing toward the door. "My pa doesn't know I'm here. If he did, he'd whip me. But somebody's got to do something right. Can't just let bad people win." The kid disappeared before Mason could answer. Inside, he found Margaret and Abigail in the war room. Abigail looked better color back in her face, arm in a proper sling. The fever had broken during the night, but her eyes held a new hardness, like something inside her had crystallized into steel. "You heard?" Margaret asked. "The boy told me. Fletcher's coming tonight." "Not just coming, he's already in Helena. Checked into the Grand Hotel 2 hours ago using a fake name." Margaret spread papers across the table. "But Blackwood knows. He's got men watching the hotel, watching the train station, watching everything. The moment Fletcher tries to meet with us, they'll move." "Then we go to him," Abigail said, "at the hotel. Too dangerous. Blackwood's men will be watching for us, so we don't go in the front door." Abigail leaned over the map. "These buildings, they're connected, aren't they? Old mining tunnels underneath." Margaret looked at her with something like respect. "You've done your research." "My father taught me. When you're investigating corruption, always know the escape routes." Abigail traced a path with her finger. "We can enter through the Chinese laundry on 5th Street, go through the tunnels, come up inside the hotel. Blackwood's men will be watching street level. They won't expect us underground." The tunnels are dangerous, Margaret warned. Some are flooded, some have collapsed. And there are people down there, addicts, criminals, people with nowhere else to go. They don't take kindly to strangers. You know someone who can guide us? Margaret hesitated, then nodded. There's a man, used to work in the mines before the railroad bought him out and destroyed his claim. He lives down there now, knows every tunnel, every passage, but he's... She searched for the word. Unpredictable. Half mad from mercury poisoning. Some days he's lucid. Other days he tries to kill anyone who comes near him. Can you talk to him? Mason asked. I can try. He trusts me. Sometimes. Margaret stood. Wait here, I'll be back in an hour. She left through a hidden door in the back wall. Mason watched her go, then turned to Abigail. You should stay here. That shoulder is healing fine. She cut him off. And I'm not staying behind while you risk your life for my father's investigation. It's not about risk. It's about what? Protecting me. I don't need protection, Mason. I need justice. Her voice went hard. I watched my father die. I led Blackwood to Thomas Garrett and got him killed. I won't sit in a safe room while other people fight my battles. Mason wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she'd done enough, suffered enough, but he saw the look in her eyes and knew it would be useless. She'd made up her mind, and maybe she was right. Maybe hiding while others fought wasn't courage, it was just another kind of dying. All right, he said, but you follow my lead down there. Those tunnels are a maze. Get separated and you'll never find your way out. Agreed. They spent the next hour preparing. Mason cleaned his guns and checked his ammunition. Abigail studied Margaret's maps, memorizing routes and landmarks. Neither spoke much. Words felt unnecessary now. They'd moved past small talk and politeness into something deeper, the kind of understanding that only comes from shared danger and shared grief. Margaret returned as the sun was setting. With her was a man who looked like he'd been carved from rock and shadow, tall, gaunt clothes hanging off him like rags. His eyes were the color of old pennies, and they didn't quite focus right. This is Samuel, Margaret said. He'll guide you. Samuel stared at them for a long moment, then he smiled, showing teeth like tombstones. Going into the dark, are we following the veins looking for gold? His voice had a sing-song quality, like a child reciting poetry. But there's no gold left. The railroad took it all, took everything, left us with nothing but darkness and water and the sound of the earth grinding its teeth. Samuel, Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. These people need to reach the Grand Hotel. Can you take them through the tunnels? Through and through and through. Samuel nodded rapidly. I know the ways, the secret ways, the paths that don't exist on maps, but... He leaned close, and Mason smelled decay on his breath. The dark doesn't like strangers. It eats them, swallows them whole. You have to pay the toll. What toll? Abigail asked. Samuel's eyes focused on her, suddenly sharp. Truth. The dark demands truth. Lies taste like poison down there, and the dark spits them back up. He touched her wounded shoulder and she flinched. You're carrying death. I can smell it. Death and vengeance and grief. Can you guide us or not? Mason's hand rested on his gun. Oh, I can guide you. Question is whether you'll follow. Samuel laughed, high, brittle sound. Most people can't handle the dark. They panic, run, get lost, die down there with the rats and the forgotten things. But you... He looked at Mason. You've been lost for years already. What's a few more hours in the dark? Mason didn't answer, didn't know how. They left after full dark, moving through back alleys toward the Chinese Quarter. The streets were empty, curfew enforced by Blackwood's men. Twice they had to hide while patrols passed. Twice Mason's hand tightened on his rifle, ready to fight if they were discovered. The laundry was a small building wedged between a gambling hall and an opium den. Margaret knocked 3 times, paused, knocked twice more. The door opened. A woman's face appeared, said something quick in Chinese. Margaret answered in the same language, and they were ushered inside. The laundry was thick with steam and the smell of lye soap. Workers bent over tubs paid them no attention. Margaret led them to the back through a storage room to a trapdoor hidden under bags of rice. "This is as far as I go," she said. "Samuel will take you from here. When you reach the hotel, find Fletcher. Give him everything, the journal, the map, all of it. Make him understand what's at stake." "What about you?" Abigail asked. "I'll spread the word. Call in favors. By tomorrow morning, half the miners in Helena will know the truth about the railroad. Some will fight, some will run, but enough will stand that Blackwood will have a problem." Margaret gripped Abigail's good hand. "Your father would be proud. You know that, right?" Abigail's throat worked. She nodded. Margaret opened the trap door. Darkness yawned below, and with it came the smell of damp earth and old stone, and something else, something rotten and ancient. Samuel descended first, his body disappearing into shadow. Mason went next, then helped Abigail down. The ladder was slick with moisture and went deeper than he'd expected. 20 feet, 30. Finally his boots hit stone. Margaret's face appeared above them, backlit by lamplight. "Be careful. And Mason, bring her back safe." The trapdoor closed. Darkness fell like a hammer. For a moment Mason couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except water dripping somewhere distant and his own breathing loud in his ears. Then Samuel struck a match and the tunnel came into view. It was narrow, walls of rough stone ceiling barely 6 feet high. The floor was uneven, puddled with water that reflected the matchlight like scattered stars. Support beams sagged overhead, some cracked, some missing entirely. "Stay close," Samuel said, "and don't wander. The tunnels remember everyone who enters, but they only let some people leave." He started walking, the match held high. Mason and Abigail followed. The tunnel twisted and branched. Some passages were tall enough to walk upright. Others forced them to crouch or crawl. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Mason's lungs burned with each step. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Samuel stopped at a junction where 5 tunnels met. "Which way?" Mason asked. Samuel didn't answer. He was staring at one of the passages, head tilted, listening to something Mason couldn't hear. "Samuel, shh." The old miner raised a hand. "Something's wrong. The dark is angry, restless." He looked at them and his eyes were clear for the first time, focused, afraid. "Someone else is down here, following us." Mason's hand went to his gun. "Blackwood's men?" "Maybe, or something worse." Samuel moved quickly now, no longer wandering, but purposeful. "We need to reach the hotel fast, before they catch up." They ran. The tunnel floor was treacherous, slick with mud and water. Twice Abigail stumbled and Mason caught her. His shoulders screamed where she'd grabbed it, but he didn't let go. Behind them, voices echoed, men's voices hard and sharp, getting closer. "There," one of them shouted. "I see light ahead." Samuel cursed and doused the match, plunging them into darkness. "Keep moving, follow the sound of my voice, and whatever you do, don't stop." They stumbled forward blind. Mason kept one hand on the wall, the other gripping Abigail's arm. His heart hammered, his lungs burned. Behind them, the voices grew louder, and now he could hear footsteps splashing through water. "They're gaining," Abigail gasped. "Almost there," Samuel said. "Just a little farther, I can feel it. The hotel is close, so close." Gunshots cracked out. Bullets sparked off stone, ricocheted in the darkness. Mason shoved Abigail down, covering her with his body. Felt something hot graze his arm, a bullet close enough to burn. "Go!" he shouted. "Get to the hotel. Not without you. I'll hold them off. Now move!" Samuel grabbed Abigail and dragged her forward. She fought him, reaching back for Mason, but the old miner was stronger than he looked. They disappeared into the darkness. Mason turned, rifle raised, waited, let his eyes adjust to the faint light coming from behind lamplight, carried by Blackwood's men, 3 of them, maybe 4, spread out, moving careful through the tunnel, looking for him. He fired. The muzzle flash lit the tunnel like lightning. One of the men screamed and went down. The others scattered, returning fire. Bullets whined past Mason's head, and he dropped low, scrambling backward. "He's alone," someone shouted. The others went ahead. "Get them!" Two of the men pushed past, running deeper into the tunnels. The third, the one Mason had shot, lay groaning in the mud. Mason ran after the other two. His boots splashed through water. His lungs screamed. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to crouch. Ahead, he saw light. Real light, not lamplight. Daylight filtering down from above. He burst into a wider chamber and found himself at the bottom of a shaft. Iron rungs climbed the wall. Above, he could see skies, and halfway up, Abigail and Samuel climbing fast. Blackwood's men saw them too. One raised his rifle. No, Mason fired without aiming, missed, fired again. The man staggered, dropped his rifle, fell. The second man turned gun swinging toward Mason. They fired simultaneously. Mason felt something punch his side, hot and hard. He stumbled, fell to one knee. His vision grayed, but his shot had hit. The man crumpled, clutching his throat. Mason forced himself up, grabbed the iron rungs, and started climbing. Each movement sent agony through his side. He could feel blood soaking his shirt, running down his leg. But he climbed. Above, Abigail reached the top and pulled herself out. Samuel followed. Then they both looked down, and Mason saw Abigail's face go white. "You're hit." "I'm fine. Keep moving." He wasn't fine. The wound was bad. He could feel it, the way his body wasn't responding right, the way the world tilted and swam, but he climbed anyway. 10 feet from the top, his strength gave out. His hand slipped. For a moment, he hung by one arm body, swinging over empty space. Below, the dead men stared up with empty eyes. Then hands grabbed him, strong hands. Abigail and Samuel pulling together, hauling him up and over the edge. He collapsed on stone floor. Looked around. They were in a basement. Hotel basement, judging by the layout. Pipes overhead. Boxes stacked against walls. A door in the far corner. "Can you walk?" Abigail's hands pressed against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Have to." Samuel helped him up. Together, the three of them stumbled toward the door. Samuel tried the handle, locked. "Stand back." Mason raised his rifle and fired. The lock exploded. The door swung open. They emerged into a hallway. Carpeted floor, wallpaper, gas lights burning low. The Grand Hotel. A maid rounded the corner, saw them, muddy, bloody, armed, and screamed. "Which room is James Fletcher in?" Mason demanded. She just screamed louder. "Please." Abigail stepped forward. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just need to find a man named Fletcher. It's urgent." The maid pointed with a shaking hand. "3rd floor, room 314, but you can't." They were already running. Mason's side screamed with each step. His vision kept graying out, but he forced himself to move. Up the stairs, down another hallway, doors on both sides numbered in brass. 310, 311, 312, 314. Mason hammered on the door. "Fletcher, open up." "Nothing." "Fletcher, damn it, we're here about Judge Reed. Open the door." The door cracked open. A man's face appeared, thin, bearded eyes sharp behind spectacles. "Who the hell are—" He saw the blood. "Christ, get inside, now!" They stumbled into the room. Fletcher slammed the door and threw the lock. Then he turned, taking in the sight of them, muddy, bleeding, barely standing. "I'm guessing you're the ones Margaret Chen told me about." "How'd you know?" Abigail asked. "Because you look like you've been through hell, and hell is exactly where this story lives." Fletcher grabbed a towel and pressed it to Mason's side. "You need a doctor. I need you to publish the truth." Mason fumbled inside his coat, pulled out the journal and map, handed them to Fletcher with bloody fingers. "Everything's in here. Names, dates, payments, 53 families murdered, judges and senators on the railroad's payroll, the whole rotten system." Fletcher opened the journal. His eyes widened as he read. Page after page, his expression shifted from shock to anger to something harder, something determined. "My God, this is bigger than I thought. If even half of this is true, it's all true," Abigail said. "My father died for it. Thomas Garrett died for it. And if you don't publish it, everyone he trusted dies for nothing." Fletcher looked at her, at Mason bleeding on his floor, at Samuel standing guard by the door. Then he nodded. "I'll publish it, front page, tomorrow's edition." He closed the journal. "But you realize what this means. The moment this hits the streets, Blackwood will come for all of us. The railroad will deny everything. They'll call your father a liar, call you murderers. They'll use every ounce of power they have to bury this story. Let them try." Abigail's voice was steel. "We'll fight them in court, in the press, in the streets if we have to, but this ends now." Fletcher smiled, grim, dangerous expression. "Then we'd better move fast. I'll wire my editor tonight. Get this sent to Denver before Blackwood can stop it. By noon tomorrow, everyone from here to Washington will know what the Montana Central Railroad has done." Footsteps in the hallway, heavy, multiple people, moving fast. Fletcher's smile vanished. "That'll be Blackwood." "How'd he know we're here?" Samuel whispered. "Doesn't matter." Mason tried to stand and nearly fell. Abigail caught him. "We need to get out. There's a fire escape outside my window." Fletcher moved fast, throwing it open. Cold air blasted in. "Go, I'll stall them." "They'll kill you," Abigail said. "Maybe, but I'm a reporter. They kill me, it becomes an even bigger story." He shoved the journal inside his shirt. "Now go." The footsteps stopped outside the door. Someone pounded on it. "Fletcher, open this door. This is the sheriff." Mason went first, climbing through the window onto the fire escape. The metal was slick with ice. He nearly fell, caught himself on the railing. Abigail came next, then Samuel. Behind them, the door burst open. Blackwood's voice roared. "Where are they?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Fletcher said calmly. The sound of a fist hitting flesh. Fletcher grunting, furniture crashing. "I'll ask once more. Where are Colton and the Reed woman? Go to hell." More sounds of violence. Then Blackwood's voice closer to the window. "Check outside, now." Mason, Abigail, and Samuel were already climbing down. The fire escape groaned under their weight, metal protesting. 2 floors down, Mason's vision grayed completely. His hands slipped. He fell. Arms caught him. Abigail's arms, impossibly strong. She'd jammed her feet against the rungs, bracing herself, holding his full weight with her one good arm. "I've got you." Samuel helped pull him up. They reached the ground and ran into an alley just as Blackwood's men appeared on the fire escape above. "There, don't let them escape." Gunshots rang out. Bullets sparked off cobblestones. The 3 of them ran anyway, ducking and weaving through the alley's maze. Mason's legs felt like water. Each step was harder than the last. They burst onto a main street. Miners were walking to the night shift, carrying lunch pails and lamps. The crowd swallowed them, and suddenly Blackwood's men couldn't shoot without hitting innocent people. "This way." Samuel pulled them down another alley, then another. The old miner knew this town like he knew the tunnels, every shortcut, every hidden path. Finally, they stopped in a space between buildings so narrow Mason's shoulders touched both walls. He collapsed, sliding down to sit in mud and refuse. "Let me see." Abigail pulled his coat aside. The wound was still bleeding, but slower now. "Bullet went through. You're lucky." "Don't feel lucky." "You're alive. That's lucky." She tore strips from her own shirt, her good arm working fast, and wrapped his side tight. Her hands were gentle despite their situation. "We need to get you to a real doctor. After Fletcher publishes the story." "Mason, after." He grabbed her hand. "If I die before, then at least I die knowing the truth got out, that your father's work meant something." She stared at him, then nodded. Samuel peered around the corner. "They're searching the streets. Won't take long before they find us." "Where can we go?" Abigail asked. "Back to Margaret's, through the tunnels." Samuel looked at Mason. "If you can walk." Mason forced himself to stand. His side screamed. His vision swam, but he stood. "I can walk." They descended back into the darkness, Samuel leading the way through passages Mason couldn't see. Time lost meaning down there. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. All Mason knew was pain and darkness and the sound of water dripping in the endless black. Finally, light appeared ahead. Lamplight, Margaret's voice calling down. "Samuel, is that you?" "It's us," Abigail answered, "and we need help. Mason's been shot." They climbed back up into the laundry. Margaret took one look at Mason and started shouting orders in Chinese. Women appeared with clean water bandages, something that smelled like herbs and tasted like fire when Margaret forced him to drink it. "Did you reach Fletcher?" she asked while working on Mason's wound. "We did. He's publishing everything tomorrow," Margaret smiled. "Then it was worth it, all of it." "He might be dead," Abigail said quietly. "Blackwood broke into his room right after we left. Then he died doing what mattered." Margaret's hands kept moving, efficient and sure. "That's more than most of us get." Mason lay there while they worked on him, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Fletcher, about Thomas Garrett, about Judge Reed, about all the people who died trying to do the right thing. Maybe they'd win. Maybe Fletcher would publish the story, and it would change everything. Maybe justice would prevail, and the railroad would fall, and Blackwood would hang for his crimes. Or maybe they'd all die anyway. Maybe the story would get buried. Maybe nothing would change. But at least they'd fought. At least they'd tried. That had to count for something. Abigail sat beside him, her good hand resting on his arm. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. They'd been through too much together now, shared too much pain and fear and desperate hope. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, even if it killed them. Outside, Helena burned through another night. Miners dug for gold that wasn't there. The railroad ground forward, crushing everything in its path. And somewhere in the darkness, Blackwood hunted. But in this small room, surrounded by people who'd decided to stand and fight, Mason Colton finally felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. The newspaper hit the streets at dawn. Mason woke to the sound of shouting outside, men's voices rough and angry, then women's voices joining in, then what sounded like a crowd gathering, swelling, growing louder by the minute. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His side erupted in fire. Margaret's herbs had dulled the pain during the night, but now it came roaring back. Abigail appeared in the doorway. She looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles under her eyes, hair falling loose from its braid, but her face held something new, something fierce. "Fletcher did it. The story's out." She handed him a newspaper, the Denver Post, dated today. And there across the entire front page, in letters 2 inches tall, "Corruption and Murder, the Montana Central Railroad's Reign of Terror." Below it, James Fletcher's byline. And below that, everything. Names, dates, payments. The murdered families. The bribed officials. Judge Walter Reed's investigation laid bare for the world to see. "My God," Mason breathed. "It's spreading like wildfire." The morning train brought 50 copies from Denver. By noon, people were making their own copies by hand, passing them around. Every saloon, every mining camp, every home in Helena has seen this by now. Abigail's hands trembled as she took the paper back. "My father's work, his whole investigation, it's finally out there where it can't be buried." "Where's Fletcher?" Her face fell. "Gone. Margaret's contacts at the hotel say Blackwood arrested him last night, charged him with conspiracy to incite violence. They took him to the territorial jail. He knew it would happen." "Doesn't make it right." Abigail sat on the edge of the bed. "But it worked. People are angry, really angry. Margaret says half the miners in town are refusing to work today. The saloons are packed with men talking about forming committees demanding investigations. Even some of the territorial officials are backpedaling, claiming they had no idea what the railroad was doing." "They're lying. Of course they're lying, but they're scared. That's what matters." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "We did it, Mason. We actually did it. The story's out. The truth is out there." "Then why do you look like someone died?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because truth doesn't stop bullets. And Blackwood's still out there with an army of hired guns." Her voice went soft. "Fletcher's in jail. Margaret's boarding house is surrounded. I counted at least a dozen men watching the building, and you can barely stand. We won, but I don't know if we'll live long enough to see justice done. Mason forced himself to sit up despite the pain. Help me get dressed. You need rest. I need to move. If we're surrounded, we're trapped, and trapped animals die. He grabbed her hand. Your father didn't sacrifice everything just so we could hide in a basement, waiting for Blackwood to kick down the door. We finish this. Today. How? We go to the courthouse, demand a public hearing. With this story in every hand in Helena, the territorial governor can't ignore it. He'll have to act or face a riot. He's in Blackwood's pocket. You saw the names in my father's journal. Maybe, but he's also a politician, and politicians care about one thing above all else: staying in power. Mason stood, gritting his teeth against the pain. Right now, the people are angry. If the governor sides with Blackwood, that anger turns on him. But if he throws Blackwood to the wolves, claims he was deceived, demands justice, he might salvage his career. Abigail stared at him. That's actually brilliant. Or it's suicide. Won't know until we try. Margaret appeared with fresh bandages and a pot of something that smelled like medicine and tasted like dirt. She redressed Mason's wound while lecturing him in 3 languages about men who refuse to rest. But she also brought clothes, clean, respectable clothes that wouldn't mark them as fugitives. Tommy's watching the street, she said while working. Blackwood has men front and back, but they're not moving, just watching, waiting for something. Waiting for orders, Mason said. They know we're here, but they can't just storm in. Not with half of Helena watching, not after that story broke. One wrong move and this whole town explodes. So we're in a standoff. For now. Mason stood and tested his weight. The pain was manageable, barely. How do we get to the courthouse without being shot? We don't hide. Abigail was already moving toward the door. We walk right out the front in broad daylight with witnesses everywhere. Blackwood won't risk killing us in front of a crowd. Not today. You sure about that? No, but I'm done hiding. She looked back at him. My father walked into his house knowing Blackwood would kill him. He did it anyway because someone had to stand up. Well, now it's our turn. We walk out there heads high and dare them to shoot us where everyone can see. Margaret made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Your father raised a warrior, Abigail Reed. He raised someone who's tired of good people dying while bad people win. Abigail checked her gun, the small revolver Margaret had given her yesterday, and tucked it into her coat pocket. Are you coming, Mason, or do I do this alone? Mason picked up his rifle. Let's go make some noise. They walked down the stairs together, through the kitchen where laundry workers stopped and stared, through the front room where Margaret's boarders gathered at windows watching the street, to the front door where Tommy Briggs stood guard, his young face set in determined lines. There's 12 of them out there, the boy reported, all armed. But there's also about 50 townspeople just standing around watching. Word spread that you're in here. People want to see what happens next. Then let's give them a show. Abigail reached for the door handle. Mason caught her arm. Wait, if this goes wrong, if they start shooting, you run. Don't look back. Don't try to help me. Just run and get that journal to the marshal in Fort Benton. Promise me. I'm not leaving you. Abigail, I said I'm not leaving you. She met his eyes. We do this together or not at all. Those are the only options. He wanted to argue, wanted to make her see sense, but he saw in her face the same stubborn determination he'd seen in Sarah's face years ago when she'd refused to stay in Kansas while he went west. Some women couldn't be protected, couldn't be kept safe, could only be stood beside while the world burned. Together then. She opened the door. The street exploded with noise, townspeople shouting, Blackwood's men raising weapons. Someone rang a bell, the church bell, calling more people to witness whatever was about to happen. Mason and Abigail stepped out onto the porch, stood there exposed while 50 pairs of eyes locked onto them. Blackwood stood across the street flanked by his deputies. His face was purple with rage. "Colton Reed, you're both under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and treason against the Montana Territory." "Treason?" Abigail's voice rang clear. "Is that what you call exposing corruption because I call it justice? You call it justice to spread lies about decorated lawmen and respected businessmen." Blackwood took a step forward. "That newspaper is full of fabrications. Your father was a madman who manufactured evidence to destroy innocent people. And you're continuing his delusion." "Then prove it," Mason shouted. "Call a hearing. Present your evidence. Let a judge decide who's lying. I don't take orders from murderers. No, you just take orders from railroad executives." A voice from the crowd, one of the miners. Others joined in shouting agreement. "You killed Judge Reed. You burned Silver Creek. My brother died in one of your raids." The crowd was growing, more people streaming from buildings, from mines, from homes. And they were angry. Mason could feel it, that dangerous energy when a mob decides it's had enough. One spark and this whole street would explode into violence. Blackwood felt it too. His hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't draw. Couldn't draw, not with this many witnesses. "The territorial governor has issued a warrant for your arrest," he said, voice strained. "Surrender now and you'll get a fair trial. Like my father got." Abigail descended the steps, moving into the street. "He asked for a meeting to present his evidence. You shot him in his own home 3 times. I watched him die, Blackwood. Watched you murder him in cold blood. So forgive me if I don't trust your promises of a fair trial." "That's a lie." "Is it? Then explain why you're so afraid of a hearing." She was moving closer now, fearless, her voice carrying to every corner of the street. "If my father's evidence is fabricated, expose it. If the railroad is innocent, prove it. But you won't, because you can't. Because everything in that newspaper is true. Every name, every payment, every murdered family, all of it true." The crowd roared approval. Men pumped fists. Women shouted curses at Blackwood. The sheriff's face went from purple to white. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Surrender or I'll be forced to use violence to apprehend you." "Then use it." Abigail stood 10 feet from him now, hands at her sides. "Shoot me right here, where everyone can see. Make me a martyr like you made my father. See how that works out for you." For a long moment, nobody moved. The whole street held its breath. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, Sheriff Blackwood." Everyone turned. A man was pushing through the crowd, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a fine suit. Mason recognized him from newspaper photographs. Governor William Bradford. Blackwood's eyes went wide. "Governor, I didn't know you were in Helena." "Clearly." Bradford stopped beside Abigail, looking her up and down. "You're Judge Reed's daughter." "I am." "And you're the one who provided evidence to that reporter, Fletcher." "My father provided the evidence. I just made sure it reached someone who'd print it." Bradford nodded slowly. Then he turned to the crowd. "I've read the story in the Denver Post. I've reviewed the allegations, and I'm ordering a full territorial investigation into the Montana Central Railroad and all associated parties." He looked at Blackwood. "Including you, Sheriff. You're hereby suspended from duty pending inquiry." Blackwood's hand dropped to his gun. "You can't do this. I'm appointed by me, and I can revoke that appointment any time I choose." Bradford's voice went cold. "You'll surrender your badge and your weapon, now." "Governor, you don't understand. These people are dangerous. They've murdered. The only person I see making threats is you, Sheriff." Bradford gestured to 2 men in the crowd, territorial marshals. Mason realized who'd been standing there the whole time. "Take him into custody, and his men." Chaos erupted. Blackwood went for his gun. One of the marshals tackled him. Deputies scattered. The crowd surged forward, and suddenly everyone was shouting, pushing, fighting. Mason grabbed Abigail and pulled her back toward the boarding house. A gun went off, impossible to tell whose. Someone screamed. More shots cracked out. Then Samuel appeared from nowhere, grabbing them both. "This way, through the alley." They ran. Behind them, the street descended into full riot. Gunfire, breaking glass, men shouting war cries, the anger that had been building for months finally erupting into violence. Samuel led them through passages Mason couldn't track, behind buildings, through yards, over fences. Finally, they stopped in a stable, breathing hard. "What just happened?" Abigail gasped. "Revolution." Samuel's eyes were clearer than Mason had ever seen them. The people finally had enough. They're tearing Blackwood's men apart out there. The governor is trying to save his own skin. He knows if he sides with the railroad now, he's finished. So he throws Blackwood to the wolves and pretends he was innocent all along. Samuel laughed. Politicians, always the same. "Will it work?" Mason asked. "Maybe, or maybe it's too little too late. Either way, Blackwood's done. His men are scattered. The territorial marshals are making arrests. And that newspaper is still spreading, reaching towns all across Montana." Samuel looked at them both. "You won. Might not feel like it yet, but you won." Mason wasn't so sure. Winning meant justice, meant trials and convictions, meant the railroad executives and corrupt officials actually facing consequences. And that was a long way from guaranteed. But they'd done something, exposed the truth, turned the tide, given people like Fletcher and Thomas Garrett and Judge Reed a chance to be remembered for their courage instead of forgotten in unmarked graves. That had to count for something. A boy appeared in the stable doorway. Not Tommy, someone older, maybe 16. "Miss Reed, Mr. Colton, Marshal Hayes sent me. He's at the courthouse, says he needs to see you both right away." They followed the boy through back streets to the courthouse. The building was surrounded by armed men, not Blackwood's deputies, but territorial marshals and soldiers called in from the fort. Inside, the halls were packed with people demanding hearings, filing complaints, seeking justice. Marshal Hayes was a weathered man in his 50s with eyes that had seen too much. He stood in his office reviewing papers stacked 3 feet high on his desk. "Miss Reed, Mr. Colton." He gestured to chairs. "Please sit. You both look like hell." "Been a rough few days," Mason admitted. "I imagine so." Hayes picked up a document. "I have arrest warrants here for 23 people. Railroad executives, territorial senators, judges, all named in your father's investigation. The governor's ordered me to serve them immediately." "Will you?" Abigail asked. "I will. Question is whether the courts will convict them." Hayes sat back, rubbing his eyes. "These are powerful men. They have lawyers, money connections. They'll fight every charge, delay every trial. Some will flee the territory. Some will disappear evidence. Some will threaten or bribe witnesses. So nothing changes." "I didn't say that." Hayes leaned forward. "What you did exposing this, publicly forcing it into the national press, that changed everything. Before, these men operated in shadows. Now the whole country is watching. They can't just make this disappear. We have a real chance at justice. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick." "How long?" Mason asked. "Months, maybe years. There'll be hearings, trials, appeals. You'll both have to testify. Repeatedly. They'll drag you through the mud, call you liars, try to destroy your credibility." Hayes looked at Abigail. "They'll say your father was corrupt, that he manufactured evidence out of revenge or greed. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made and use it against you." "Let them try." Abigail's voice was steel. "I watched my father die for this. I'll spend the rest of my life testifying if that's what it takes." Hayes smiled, grim but genuine. "Good, because that's exactly what I need. Strong witnesses who won't break under pressure." He pulled out another document. "James Fletcher's being released today. The governor can't hold him without charges, and charging a reporter for printing the truth would be political suicide. He'll continue covering the story." "What about Blackwood?" Mason asked. "In custody, along with 6 of his deputies. We found evidence in his office payment records from the railroad orders to eliminate specific individuals' correspondence with executives. Your father documented everything, but having physical proof helps." Hayes's expression darkened. "Some of his men escaped. They'll go to ground, might try to retaliate. You should both stay under protection until we round them up. For how long? As long as it takes. Mason exchanged a look with Abigail. She was thinking the same thing he was. Months of protection. Months of waiting. Months of living in fear while lawyers argued and judges deliberated. After everything they'd been through, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like limbo. But maybe that's what justice was. Not a single moment of triumph, but a long, grinding process of holding people accountable. Of refusing to give up even when it felt impossible. "We'll testify," Mason said. "Whatever you need." "Good." Hayes stood and offered his hand. "Thank you, both of you. What you did took real courage. Your father would be proud, Miss Reed." Abigail shook his hand. "I hope so." They left the courthouse under armed escort. The sun was setting now, painting Helena in orange and gold. The rioting had stopped, but the streets were still tense. Groups of men stood on corners talking in low voices. Windows were broken, buildings burned and burned. The smell of smoke hung thick in the air. Margaret was waiting at the boarding house with food and clean beds. She fussed over Mason's wound, changed his bandages, forced more of that awful medicine down his throat. But her eyes were bright, happy. "It's working," she said. "People are organizing, forming committees, demanding investigations into every suspicious death in the past 5 years. The railroad's terrified. I heard their executives are fleeing to San Francisco." "It's not over yet," Abigail warned. "No, but it started. That's more than we had yesterday." Margaret looked at them both. "You should rest. Tomorrow brings new battles." Mason lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Sarah and Emma, about the 5 years he'd spent waiting to die, about how a wounded stranger had stumbled onto his porch and given him a reason to fight. A knock at the door. Abigail entered, still dressed, clearly unable to sleep. "Can't stop thinking about him," she said quietly. "My father, wondering if he'd think this was enough, if exposing the truth was worth the cost. He died believing it was. But what if he was wrong? What if all this suffering, all these deaths, and nothing really changes? What if the railroad just hires new men and starts over?" Mason considered that. "Then we stop them again and again, however many times it takes. For how long? As long as we're alive." He looked at her. "Your father understood something important. Evil doesn't get tired, doesn't give up. It just keeps pushing, keeps grinding people down, hoping they'll give up first. The only way to beat it is to refuse to quit, to keep standing up, keep fighting even when it feels hopeless. That's exhausting." "Yeah, it is." Mason smiled just a little. "But it's better than the alternative." She sat on the edge of his bed. They were quiet for a while, listening to the sounds of Helena settling into uneasy night. "Thank you," she finally said, "for helping me, for not throwing me out when I showed up bleeding on your porch, for risking your life when you had no reason to care." "I had a reason." "What? You gave me one." Mason looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the judge's daughter or the wounded fugitive, but the woman who'd faced down killers and never flinched, who'd walked into gunfire because it was right, who reminded him what it felt like to be alive. "5 years I waited to die, then you showed up and reminded me there were still things worth living for, worth fighting for." Abigail's eyes shone with tears. "We're a mess, aren't we? 2 broken people trying to fix a broken world." "Maybe, but we're still here, still fighting." He reached out and took her hand. "That counts for something." She squeezed back, nodded, then stood and moved toward the door. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow we start the real work." "What's that?" "Rebuilding. Everything the railroad destroyed lives home's hope. It's all got to be put back together." She looked back at him. "And I'm going to need help." "You've got it." She smiled, first real smile he'd seen from her since this whole thing started, and left, closing the door soft behind her. Mason lay back and closed his eyes. His side still hurt. His whole body ached. Tomorrow would bring trials and testimony and 1,000 new problems. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't waiting to die. He was planning to live, and that made all the difference. The trial began 6 months later on a cold spring morning. Mason stood outside the territorial courthouse watching Helena wake up. The town had changed since that riot in the streets. New buildings rose where old ones had burned. New faces appeared, journalists from as far as New York and Chicago, lawyers in expensive suits, federal investigators sent by Washington. The Montana Central Railroad had become the most scrutinized company in America, and Helena was ground zero. Abigail appeared beside him dressed in black. She'd worn black every day since her father's death. Mourning clothes that she refused to put away until justice was served. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." They climbed the courthouse steps together. Inside, the gallery was packed. Every seat filled, people standing in the aisles pressed against walls. Mason recognized faces from that day in the street, miners who'd refused to work, women who'd shouted curses at Blackwood shopkeepers, who'd closed their stores in protest. The people who'd decided enough was enough. And there in the defendant's box sat Sheriff Tom Blackwood. He'd aged 10 years in 6 months. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like fear. Beside him sat 3 railroad executives and 2 territorial senators, all facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, bribery, fraud, and treason. Judge Samuel Morrison, brought in from Wyoming specifically because he had no ties to Montana, took his seat. He was an old man with white hair and eyes that missed nothing. "This court is now in session. The territory of Montana versus Thomas Blackwood and associated defendants." Morrison's voice carried through the room. "The prosecution may call its first witness." The territorial prosecutor, a young man named Davis, who'd been appointed after the old prosecutor fled the territory, stood. "The prosecution calls Abigail Reed." Abigail walked to the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Then she sat and looked directly at Blackwood. "Miss Reed," Davis began, "please tell the court what happened on the night of November 15th. Abigail's voice was steady, clear. "Sheriff Blackwood came to our home around 8 in the evening. He said he needed to discuss my father's investigation into railroad corruption. My father knew something was wrong. I could see it in his face. He told me to leave through the back while he talked to Blackwood." "Did you leave?" "I started to, but I heard shouting. My father's voice, then Blackwood's, then gunshots. 3 of them." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I ran back, found my father on the kitchen floor. Blackwood was standing over him with a smoking gun. He looked at me and said, 'Tell me where the evidence is, and I'll let you live.' I knew he was lying. So I ran." "Objection." Blackwood's lawyer, a slick man from Chicago named Harrington, stood. "The witness is clearly biased. Her testimony is based on emotion, not fact. She was in shock, possibly confused about what she saw. Overruled." Morrison's voice was ice. "The witness will continue." Abigail described everything: the chase through the blizzard, finding Mason's ranch, the confrontation between Mason and Blackwood, Silver Creek burning, Thomas Garrett's body in the snow, every detail, every moment, every death. The gallery was silent. Some people wept. Others sat with jaws clenched, fists tight with rage. When she finished, Davis presented evidence. Judge Reed's journal, the map, payment records found in Blackwood's office, letters between the sheriff and railroad executives discussing eliminating obstacles and clearing problematic properties. Harrington tried to discredit everything, called the journal fabricated, called the witnesses liars, suggested Judge Reed had been mentally unstable, that his daughter was continuing his delusion, that the whole story was an elaborate conspiracy to damage the railroad's reputation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Name after name, date after date, 53 families dead or missing, and every thread led back to the same people: Blackwood, the executives, the senators. On the 3rd day, the prosecution called Mason. He took the stand and told his part. The wounded woman on his porch, the map with his ranch circled in red, Blackwood's threats, the siege, the escape through the mountains, finding Silver Creek in flames. "Mr. Colton," Davis asked, "why did you help Miss Reed? You didn't know her, didn't know her father. You could have turned her over to Blackwood and saved yourself." Mason looked at Abigail in the gallery, at the people who'd stood with them in the street, at Blackwood sitting there trying to look innocent. "Because it was right," he said simply. "Judge Reed was murdered for trying to expose corruption. His daughter was hunted for carrying his evidence, and I was marked for death because my land sat where the railroad wanted track. Somebody had to stand up, might as well be me. Even knowing it could cost your life, especially knowing that." Mason met Blackwood's eyes. "Men like him count on good people being too scared to fight back. They count on us valuing our own safety over what's right. The only way evil wins is if we let it." Harrington tried to break him on cross-examination, suggested Mason was an opportunist seeking reward money, implied he'd manipulated a traumatized woman for financial gain, questioned his war record, his dead wife, everything he could twist into doubt. Mason sat there and took it, answered every question honestly, let the lawyer exhaust himself trying to find cracks that didn't exist. On the fifth day, James Fletcher testified, described meeting Mason and Abigail in his hotel room, receiving Judge Reed's journal, publishing the story despite threats and violence, being arrested and held without charges until public pressure forced his release. Margaret Chen testified, Samuel testified, Tommy Briggs testified, the boy describing how he'd watched Blackwood's men burn buildings and shoot people who tried to flee. Witness after witness, story after story, the weight of evidence crushing any hope of acquittal. Finally, on the eighth day, the prosecution rested. Harrington presented his defense, character witnesses who swore Blackwood was honest, railroad executives who claimed ignorance of any wrongdoing, experts who questioned the authenticity of documents. It was all smoke and mirrors, an attempt to create reasonable doubt where none existed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant Thomas Blackwood guilty. On the charge of bribery, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of treason against the Montana Territory, guilty. The gallery erupted, people shouting, crying, embracing. Someone started singing a hymn about justice and redemption. Others joined in until the whole courtroom rang with voices. Judge Morrison hammered his gavel. "Order, I will have order." The room quieted. Morrison looked at Blackwood with contempt. "Sheriff Thomas Blackwood, you have been found guilty of crimes against the people of this territory, crimes that resulted in the deaths of innocent men, women, and children. This court sentences you to hang by the neck until dead. Sentence to be carried out 1 month from today." Blackwood's face crumbled. His lawyer started to speak, but Blackwood waved him off. He looked across the courtroom at Abigail. "I was following orders," he said quietly. "Just doing what I was told." "That's not an excuse." Abigail's voice cut through the room. "You pulled the trigger. You murdered my father. You burned towns and killed families. You made those choices, and now you pay for them." Blackwood looked away. Marshals led him out in chains. The trial for the railroad executives and senators continued for 3 more weeks. All were convicted. Some received prison sentences. Others were fined amounts that bankrupted them. The Montana Central Railroad was dissolved. Its assets seized, its remaining executives barred from doing business in the territory. It wasn't perfect justice. Some guilty men escaped, some fled to Mexico or Canada. Some died before trial. But it was something. It was accountability. It was the system working the way Judge Reed had believed it could. On the day of Blackwood's execution, Mason and Abigail stood in a crowd of 500 people. The gallows had been built in the town square. Blackwood was led up the steps in chains, a black hood over his head. "Any last words?" the hangman asked. Blackwood was silent for a long moment, then muffled through the hood, "I'm sorry." 2 words, barely audible, but Abigail heard them. Mason saw her close her eyes, take a breath, then open them again. The trapdoor dropped. Blackwood fell. It was quick. The crowd was silent. No cheering, no celebration, just a collective release of breath relief that it was finally over. They buried him in an unmarked grave on the edge of town. No ceremony, no mourners, just dirt and stones and the wind blowing across empty prairie. 3 days later, Mason and Abigail returned to his ranch. The place was in ruins. The cabin had been burned during Blackwood's siege. Nothing left but charred timbers and memories. The barn still stood barely. The fences were down. Weeds had taken over everywhere, but the land was still there. The mountains still rose in the distance, and on the hill, overlooking everything, 2 graves marked with simple wooden crosses. "Sarah and Emma," Abigail said softly. "Yeah." Mason stood there, hat in hand, looking at the graves he'd dug 5 years ago. "I promised I'd never leave them. Then I did. Spent 6 months in Helena while this place fell apart. You were fighting for something that mattered. Maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that I left." He knelt between the graves, brushing away dirt and fallen leaves. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." Abigail knelt beside him. "My father used to say the dead don't want our apologies. They want us to live, to honor them by being better than we were, by fighting for what's right, by refusing to give up even when everything seems lost." She looked at the graves. "I never met your wife and daughter, but I think they'd be proud of what you did, of who you became." Mason thought about that. About the man he'd been five years ago, a husband and father who'd failed to protect the people he loved. About the man he'd become, someone who'd found the courage to stand up when it mattered. "I want to rebuild," he said. "Not just the cabin, everything. The barn, the fences, the whole ranch. Make it something Sarah and Emma would be proud of. That'll take time, money, help." "I know." He looked at her. "Will you stay?" Abigail met his eyes. For 6 months, they'd been partners in fighting for justice. They'd testified together, faced threats together, rebuilt their lives in a town that had become something new. But this was different. This was him asking her to build something permanent, something lasting. "I don't know anything about ranching," she said. "You didn't know anything about running from killers either. Figured it out pretty quick." She laughed, first time he'd heard her really laugh since her father died. "Fair point." She stood looking around at the ruined ranch. "My father left me some money, not much but enough to help with rebuilding, and I'm decent with a hammer, learned from helping him build our house back in Kansas. So that's a yes. That's a yes." She extended her hand. "Partners." Mason took it. Partners. They worked through spring and summer, built a new cabin from timber cut in the mountains, raised a new barn with help from miners who'd fought beside them, repaired fences and cleared land and planted crops. Tommy Briggs came out weekends to help along with other kids from town who'd heard the stories and wanted to be part of something hopeful. Margaret visited once a month, bringing supplies and news from Helena. The trials were winding down. Most of the guilty had been convicted. The territorial government was being reformed. New laws were being written to prevent future corruption. It was slow, messy work, but it was happening. Fletcher came to writing stories about rebuilding and redemption, about a judge's daughter and a widowed rancher who'd fought corruption and won and were now building something beautiful from the ashes. By autumn, the ranch was whole again, better than whole. The cabin was larger, stronger. The barn could hold twice as many animals, and beside the graves on the hill, they'd built something new, a small schoolhouse. "Montana needs teachers," Abigail had said. "Kids growing up out here need education, someone to teach them reading, writing, history, someone to tell them that standing up for what's right matters." So she became a teacher. Children came from neighboring ranches and homesteads. She taught them the basics, but also something more important, that justice exists, that courage matters, that good people can make a difference. Mason ran the ranch and helped with the school, built desks and repaired the roof when it leaked, taught the older boys about ranching and responsibility, found purpose in work and community that he'd lost when Sarah and Emma died. On the first anniversary of Judge Reed's death, they held a ceremony. The whole territory seemed to come, people from Helena and Silver Creek and Fort Benton, miners and ranchers and shopkeepers, Margaret and Fletcher and Tommy and Samuel. Marshall Hayes came along with Judge Morrison. They dedicated a monument in Town Square. Simple stone marker with names carved deep, Judge Walter Reed and all the others who'd died fighting corruption. Thomas Garrett, the families from Silver Creek, 53 names in all. Abigail stood before the crowd and spoke. My father believed in justice, believed that truth would prevail if good people had the courage to fight for it. He died for that belief. So did many others. She looked at the names. But they didn't die for nothing. Because of their sacrifice, this territory is different now. Better. Corruption was exposed. Guilty men were punished. Laws were changed. And people learn that they have power when they stand together. She paused, looking out at all the faces. This monument isn't just about remembering the dead. It's about reminding the living. Evil doesn't rest. Corruption doesn't give up. There will always be people who value profit over human life, power over justice. And when they come, and they will come, we have to be ready to stand up, to fight back, to say, not here, not now, not ever. The crowd erupted in applause. Mason stood beside her, pride swelling in upon his chest. This woman who'd stumbled onto his porch bleeding and desperate had become a leader, a symbol, someone who inspired others to be better, braver, stronger. That night, as stars wheeled overhead, they sat on the porch of the new cabin. The air was crisp with approaching winter. Smoke rose from chimneys across the valley. I've been thinking, Abigail said, about getting married. Mason's heart jumped. Have you now? Not to you necessarily, just in general. But she was smiling. Been a year since my father died. Feels like maybe it's time to stop wearing black, to start building a life instead of just surviving one. And you want to build that life here on this ranch? I do. She looked at him. If you'll have me. Mason thought about Sarah, about Emma, about 5 years of grief and guilt and waiting to die, about a wounded stranger who'd given him back his life. I'd be honored, he said. They married quietly a month later. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony in the schoolhouse. Margaret and Tommy stood as witnesses. The whole community came to celebrate not a grand wedding, but something better, something real and honest and earned through struggle. They didn't need fancy words or expensive gifts. They'd already been through fire together, already proven they could stand when the world tried to knock them down. The wedding was a beginning, not an ending. A promise to keep building, keep fighting, keep hoping. Years passed. The ranch prospered, the school grew, children who'd learned from Abigail became teachers themselves. The territory became a state. Corruption never fully disappeared, but people remained vigilant, remembering the lessons learned in blood and sacrifice. Mason and Abigail had children of their own, 2 boys and a girl, raised them to be strong and kind and willing to stand up for what's right. Told them stories about their grandfather, the judge, about the fight against corruption, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when justice demanded it. On warm evenings, Mason would sit on the porch and look up at the hill where 4 graves now stood, Sarah and Emma, and beside them, Judge Walter Reed and Thomas Garrett reburied there at Abigail's request, so her father could rest somewhere peaceful, somewhere his sacrifice meant something. The dead watched over the living, and the living honored the dead by refusing to forget, refusing to give up, refusing to let evil win without a fight. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life never is. There were hard years and crop failures and children who got sick and animals that died and all the regular struggles of frontier living. But it was good, it was honest, it was a life built on principle and paid for in courage. And on cold Montana nights when the wind howled and darkness pressed close, Mason would reach for Abigail's hand and remember the night she'd pounded on his door, bleeding and desperate and carrying a map that changed everything. He'd thought he was saving her life. Turned out she'd saved his. They'd fought corruption and won, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter, enough to make the dead proud and give the living hope. And in a harsh land where survival required strength and justice demanded sacrifice, they'd built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of courage, a testament to the truth that even in the darkest times, good people can make a difference if they refuse to give up. The ranch stood strong. The school taught new generations, and the names on the monument in town square reminded everyone who passed that freedom isn't free and justice requires eternal vigilance. Mason and Abigail lived long lives, saw their children grow and have children of their own, watched Montana transform from wild territory to civilized state. And when they finally died peacefully in old age, surrounded by family, they were buried on that hill with Sarah and Emma and Judge Reed, all of them together watching over the land they'd fought so hard to protect. The fight for justice never ends. But because of people like them, it continues. One generation passing the torch to the next. One story inspiring 1,000 more. One moment of courage rippling forward through time. And somewhere in Montana, on a ranch overlooking mountains and prairie, a schoolhouse still stands where children learn that truth matters, courage counts, and ordinary people can change the world if they're willing to stand up when it matters most.